You'll remember from the famous story of Jacob deceiving Esau that the firstborn son of an Israelite family was usually in line to inherit two things, a birthright and a blessing. Now, the birthright entitled the firstborn son to a double portion of the inheritance, which, to be fair, it sounds wildly unreasonable to us, but that was just the way that their society was structured. The idea of it is that if, for example, a family had 5 children, the inheritance would be divided into 6 portions, and the firstborn son would inherit 2 of these portions. With the extra portion, they would effectively take the place of their father, and if any of the siblings got into any sort of trouble, it was the obligation of the firstborn son to use the excess he has to serve the rest of the family, like the father would do. Do all that you can to help this sibling. So that's the birthright, but there was also a mysterious blessing. You'll remember that in that ancient story, Isaac thought he was on his deathbed, and so he asked his son Esau, "Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." The blessing was a prayer that God would indeed honour, which would transfer not the physical possessions, but the spiritual leadership of the family to, typically, the firstborn son. Of course, you know the story. While Esau was out, Jacob deceived his father and received this extraordinary blessing from Isaac, and God honoured that blessing. He had already tricked his brother out of the birthright, and so Jacob skipped away with both the birthright and the blessing. Now, why do I bring up those two elements of ancient inheritance law? Well, because we're reminded that in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, a very unusual thing happened, not just to Jacob, the subject of that story, but through Jacob. In keeping with tradition, you would expect these things to be held together and both be given to Reuben. But the writer points out here that Reuben did not receive these things. He forfeit his rights as the firstborn because of his serious sin. And so both of these things went to different sons. They're both listed there. The birthright went to Joseph, the blessing went to Judah. Judah became the strongest and greatest tribe. He received the promise that the ruler and deliverer would be among his descendants. We've talked about him already. But the birthright went to Joseph. Remember that I said that you divide the inheritance into one more portion than there are sons? Well, instead of dividing it 12 ways, one for each of the sons of Israel, it was divided 13 ways, of course, and the person who got the double portion was Joseph, but he immediately forfeit his place in favour of his sons. And so typically, Joseph is not referred to as one of the tribes of Israel. Instead, Ephraim and Manasseh are treated as though they are sons in their own right. Each of them gets a place in the promised land in their own right because of Joseph's selflessness. All of that explains some of the peculiarities in why Judah is listed first, why Joseph has 2 allotments, and why Reuben is allotted to 3rd place among the brothers. Reuben's sin had generational consequences. And this is an interesting concept that we rarely explore together. Your sin affects others in ways that should cause you to stop and think about the course of action you are taking. It is more than your life on the line. The tribe of Reuben did miss out on some extraordinary blessings because of Reuben's sin. Now, they were not being punished for the sins of another, but they did feel the natural consequences of Reuben's rebellion. In the same sort of way, if a man has an affair, let's say, it might well be that he loses his marriage as a result. It doesn't have to go that way, but it might do. He will have some personal anguish that he will have to endure, brought about by his own sin. Fine, we would sort of expect those consequences to land on him. But do you see that those who were utterly innocent still will have to bear some of the crushing consequences? His wife will have suffered because of his sin. His children will have suffered because of his sin. His grandchildren even will not get the joy of growing up and seeing their granddad in the same way or with the same frequency or in the same context that they once would have done had that marriage remained in place. They will all miss out, in some sense, on some of the blessings that would have been theirs because of the sin of their forefather. There's lots more that we could say about that idea, but it's something worth observing. We see the same thing at the end of this passage as well, when we read about the king of Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser, taking the Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh off into exile. Well, we are reminded here that all those generations earlier, these are the 2.5 tribes who refused to cross over the River Jordan and come into the promised land. Do you remember that story? They rejected the will and the wisdom of God in favor of what they believed to be best. They put down roots, but they did it in the wrong place. They did not enjoy then the natural land defense of the River Jordan that all the other tribes were able to enjoy. They were the easiest tribes for an enemy to come along and defeat in battle and then deport into exile. The actual people who endured that, they had no choice about where they would live. Their ancestors made that decision for them. But these people down here bore the brunt of the decision that their forefathers had made. It shows you what a serious and far-reaching thing sin is, I think. May God use this passage to help every one of us to walk the narrow path, the path of righteousness and godliness, the path that leads to life. Because not only will that path honor Jesus, but that path will bring down blessing upon us and all those whose lives are connected to us in one way or another as well.